This is Jim Cantelon Today Television, Bible study for the 21st century. So friends, we're continuing our journey through the book of Luke, and I really appreciate the fact that you are being patient, because you have to be, because I do not rush. I'm dealing with this section by section. I do this in my book, by the way, Cantelon's Casual Commentary. When you log on to wowmission.com or jimcantelontoday.com, you go through the menu and you'll find an ad there for Cantelon's Casual Commentary. And the very thing I'm doing here, I've done in greater detail in the book, and I hope you'll get it. I'll be back right after this.
Assure you, from the inside, it is happening. God is our hope. God is all we believe in, this God. And He has called us to be the repairers of wars and to take care of the widow and the orphan in their time of need. And that is exactly what we do. Lives are changing. Why? Because Jesus is Lord. And why? Because Christians have come together as a body. The united body of Christ is coming and saying, it stops with this generation. We break it and we move on.
The kind of religion that God endorses is to care for orphans and widows in their distress, justice, and to keep oneself unpolluted from the world, righteousness.
So we are now in Luke 21. My goodness, we're rushing right along here. And let's look at verses 1 to 4. He, Jesus, looked up from the crowd and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. He saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she, out of her poverty, put in all the livelihood that she had. Well, this is a classic story. It's, because it's so readily available to the imagination. You can just see it happening. But let me just make it even all the more real for you. Jesus is there teaching the people. He looks up from the crowd, and this is happening in the temple courts. And if you Google, well, there's any number of things you could Google, but the Temple of Solomon, or Solomon's Temple, or the Jewish Temple, or the temple courts, you'll see diagrams that you had the temple itself, which is quite a marvelous construction, but then you had a huge kind of walled courtyard around it, which could accommodate thousands of people. I mean, it was a big, big operation there. Anyway, in the temple courts, people would gather around Jesus, probably over in a corner somewhere under the shade of one of the trees. He looks up and he sees some of his Sadducean, scribal, and Pharisaic critics putting their gifts into the temple treasury, to quote Luke, putting their gifts into the temple treasury, and they're not doing so inconspicuously. Now, it wasn't all their fault, because here was the thing. The temple tithes and taxes were collected at 13 trumpet-shaped boxes located in the court of the women, in that larger courtyard around the temple. And the giving protocol required the giver to take out his or her money, to verbally announce both the amount and the purpose of the gift. And to be sure, Jesus' detractors, pompous and wealthy, made loud public declarations of their largesse. Look what I'm doing. $100 bill. Aren't I generous? One poor widow, she doesn't follow the protocol. She slips her money in under her hand, doesn't announce how much it is, but Jesus sees. 2 mites. A mite would be like, sometimes they used to do this with money. They would take a coin and they would cut it, in half and sometimes in 4s. I'm not sure exactly, but a mite would be like a half of a penny or maybe even a quarter of a penny. Right? I mean, it's infinitesimally small compared to some of these huge gifts that the scribes, Pharisees, and Sadducees were putting into these receptacles. So she anonymously slips, these 2 little bits of money into the trumpet, and then she melts humbly into the crowd. Jesus did not miss it, and he was impressed. It was the quality, not the quantity, of the gift that stirred Jesus to say, "This poor widow has put in more than all of them." Relatively speaking, that's entirely true. They gave out of their abundance. In other words, they gave a tip, if you will. She gave everything she had. So, goodbye food security for the rest of the day. Maybe I can beg some more tomorrow. Goodbye any kind of assurance I have that I might see the end of the week. Goodbye to all of that. I'm giving this as unto the Lord. Wow. All she had to live on. These mites were diamond-like in Jesus' view, whereas gifts out of the abundance of the deep-pocketed rich were like chunks of coal. Gifts that cost the giver nothing are not gifts at all. God is no waiter. Give your gifts to someone who is. That's basically what Jesus is saying. And you can be sure he said it with a tone. This reminds me of the story of David later on, or I should, previous to Jesus, of course, when he was buying the property on which eventually the temple was built. He wanted to place the tabernacle there. And the owner of, it was a threshing floor, the owner just wanted to give it to David along with some other gifts. And David says, no, I want to pay fair market value. I don't want to give anything to the Lord that costs me nothing, because he was then going to turn around and make this an offering to the Lord as a place for sacrifice and for the tabernacle to be situated. There's a principle there, friends. We need to think twice when we are giving to the Lord. If there's no sacrificial component to it, then it maybe lacks the value it would otherwise. This, I think, is part of the genius of tithing, the biblical concept of giving 1/10 of your income to the Lord. It hurts, many times when tithing, I'm aware of the mortgage, I'm aware of the car payment, I'm aware of, other things that need to be addressed. And it's not a magical thing. I'm just saying that when we tithe and when we give, not out of our abundance, but give out of our heart, it demonstrates where our heart is. That's really what it does. It shows us where our core values are, shows us how we see the world. If you have a Christian mind, you don't see this life as all there is. You see this life as only, sort of the opening chapter to a massive book that will never end on the other side of death. This life we live here on earth is just the seed in the ground. It's just the opening to the great symphony. It's just the start. And if that's how you see it, then you're not going to hold on to this world's goods as tightly as those who see it otherwise. If all there is this world in which we live, if all there is self-sufficiency, self-dependence, then make as much money as you can, hoard it, defend it, fight others for their money, do whatever you want to do, be corrupt, be greedy. Money makes the world go round, and the world goes around only for a few short years, and then we're out of it. So, make hay while the sun shines. That's the non-Christian mind. The Christian mind says, no, I've been created for the big picture, created for something beyond the grave. I've been created as the planting of the Lord, and the Lord has a plan for me in the eternities, and I'm going to fulfill that plan. If indeed my life here on earth is establishing the spiritual DNA of that planting on the other side, then so be it, and I will do everything I can in my power to love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love my neighbor with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, even as I love myself with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. Let me just pause there. Love of God, love of neighbor. Jesus said, "Hear, O Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now, in past programs, I have taken whole segments talking about heart, soul, mind, and strength, essentially which boils down to intellect, emotion, and will. Love God with your thinking, love God with your feeling, and love God with your doing. Intellect, emotion, and will. You're to love your neighbor with your intellect, emotion, and will. But we don't spend much time talking about loving ourselves with our intellect, emotion, and will. If there's one thing out there, and social media has a lot to do with this, the self-disgust that seems to be pandemic in our world, especially among young people, just hating themselves. They're comparing themselves on Instagram, to these influencers and to these people who are always looking so beautiful and putting out, these great posts that are so glossily embroidered with falsehoods and believing them. And comparing themselves to these glossy influencers and finding themselves way below the mark and hating themselves. Friends, it's time to stop hating yourself. Time to start loving yourself. Jesus said, you love God, you love your neighbor, and you love yourself in that descending order. You never put self ahead of God, you don't put self ahead of the neighbor, but in the context of the three, you live a well-balanced life. Think about it. Now Jesus here in Luke 21 is going to launch into a, not a discussion, because it's not really a discussion, but to some tantalizing insights into what we might call the end of days, the last days. Theologians call it eschatology, the last era before the day of the Lord. And in verses 5 to 38 of Luke 21, we read it, and there's no way I'm going to cover all of that in this segment, this program. But let's get started, and then next program we'll just pick up where we leave off, okay? But let's read the first few verses, beginning with verse 5 of Luke 21. Then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, he said, "These things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." So they asked him, saying, "Teacher, but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place?" To appreciate this passage, I think we need to begin with verses, say the last two verses of chapter 21, verses 37 and 38, where it says, "Each day Jesus was teaching at the temple, and each evening he went out to spend the night on the hill called the Mount of Olives, and all the people came early in the morning to hear him at the temple." These teaching sessions that were going on in the temple surround were usually early in the morning. Having lived in Israel for 7 years, I know it's the case there, and it is also in the case in Southern Africa, where we've been working now for 21 years, that morning comes early, and so does nighttime. And so you have an early sunrise and an early sundown. You don't have much twilight in that part of the world. It just kind of goes from light to dark. In fact, in the pastors' conferences that we have sponsored over the years, where I speak and I bring in some outside professionals on issues of public health, and I also bring in some well-known pastors to bring their perspective on the issue of justice for orphans and widows, and I do the overall on righteousness and justice. I always have to stop these. I do Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I have to stop them all about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because most of the thousands who show up have walked there. And you don't want to walk in the dark in Africa. You want to get home, before the darkness descends, and it descends very, very quickly. Well, in Jesus' day, these teaching sessions usually were early in the morning, and people were just up early. That's just the way it was. That was their rhythm, up early and to bed early. I mean, that was sort of their rhythm, unlike us. We're up there watching baseball games till 11 o'clock at night or whatever. Well, anyway, after these sessions were over, Jesus would go back to the Mount of Olives. And to go from the temple to the Mount of Olives, you got to go down into the Kidron Valley and then up the Mount of Olives. And he would go over the crest down to Bethany. Now, there are some suggestions that from time to time he and the disciples actually were camping on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate supposition. But generally speaking, Jesus did have room and board in Bethany, and so that's probably where he would be going over the nighttime. Okay, so during the time of the Passover, there was a carnival atmosphere in Jerusalem. Everyone wanted to be there for Passover. It really was the Super Bowl of festivals. And so on this occasion, and it probably was very close to the Passover celebration, everything Jesus said and did was being done in the context of a milling crowd. And we've talked earlier about the triumphal entry and about the cleansing of the temple courts and, the huge temple economy that was going on at a festival time like this. So, Jesus always had a huge audience. There's no question about it. So one morning, some of the crowd who had assembled at the temple to hear Jesus were remarking, like tourists, on the beautiful stonework of the temple. Oh, whoa, look at this place. Where's my iPhone? I know that area so well. Now, the temple, of course, isn't standing All that's really left is one of the outer walls is now called the Kotel, the Hakotel, some people call it the Wailing Wall. It was or the Western Wall. It's the central shrine of the Jewish world, and Jews come from all over the world to pray at that beautiful wall. You've all seen pictures of it. That's just an outer retaining wall for the temple court area, but as a retaining wall, it's gorgeous. There are some stones there that weigh several tons. They're huge, and they're cut in such a way that they were placed and have not moved even during earthquakes since the time they were placed there without mortar. It's truly astonishing. There's one stone there. I think I paced it one day. It's about 30 feet long, and about I would say 3.5 feet thick and 3.5 feet deep. 30 feet long. I mean, how do they do this? It's, astonishing. So there are people there, they're from the Galilee, they're from maybe across the Jordan, where the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, or Machir as it was called, lived, and they'd come a long way. Maybe some of them seeing Jerusalem for the first time. And they're remarking on the beautiful stones and the intricate workmanship. And Jesus, pardon me, hears this, and he interrupts with a grim word. The days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. What? Jesus indicated his prophetic view when he lamented over Jerusalem on the way down from Bethany during the triumphal entry. Oh, Jerusalem, So here now he refers to it again. What's he talking about? Well, his words came true totally just a few years later during the siege of Jerusalem by Titus in 70 A.D. When the Romans came in, and it took them the longest time, but they managed to do it. They besieged Jerusalem. It took about 3 years. It was a huge conflict. The Romans were astonished, however, at how easy it was ultimately, because even as they attacked Jerusalem from the outside, inside, the Jews were attacking each other. There were 3 different zealot groups, all of them with their own militaristic, nationalistic ideology, competing with one another like rival gangs for primacy, so that when the Romans were finally defeated, they would rule Jerusalem and they would rule the world, in a kind of a messianic fervor. So what they did is they slaughtered each other. Josephus, when writing about this in his timeless book, Wars of the Jews, describes the streets literally running with blood and people having to walk over bodies. We're talking about Jewish bodies slain by Jewish zealots, all right? And the Romans are watching this, they can hardly believe their eyes. But then they're also fighting at the walls. And over time, the Romans prevailed. And the city was razed, R-A-Z or Z-E-D, razed, totally wiped out. A temple burned. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible time. It was the end of biblical Judaism, if you will, as it was then known. So Jesus wasn't being fanatical here. He wasn't giving some irresponsible prophecy. He was saying something that totally, literally came true. And so, of course, what they want to know now is, when will these things be? Well, I won't get into that now because it's a study in itself. But next program, I'll pick up right there. When will these things be? That's verse 7 of Luke 21. And we'll slowly analyze Jesus' words about the end of days. It is gripping reading. It's not to be taken irresponsibly. One should not maneuver or manipulate with these scriptures, but they are profound, and we need to hear what Jesus says.
In Africa, even the most basic medical aid is often non-existent. It is a continent that has been ravaged by disease. malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, and AIDS are unrelenting. Every man, woman, and child suffers from a lack of adequate health care. Even treatable illnesses like diarrhea and upper respiratory infections can prove deadly. Clinics are too few and often beyond the reach of those in rural areas. WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, is equipping mobile medical clinics with knowledge and tools to reach out to the sick. Trained nurses are treating the ill. Communities are being educated on hygiene and disease prevention. Voluntary counseling and testing for HIV and AIDS is also offered through the clinic. Fear of stigma and discrimination keeps many from being tested for HIV. Nurses address this issue. They work to provide emotional and medical support for those who test positive for the virus. Communities are being transformed through education and medical treatment brought by mobile clinics. Knowledge about disease transmission is changing behaviors and preventing many illnesses. Basic health care prevents needless deaths. Voluntary counseling and testing has also curbed the spread of AIDS.
Many people have learned a lot about HIV/AIDS. Since we are taught, we are trained as community health workers, we have the knowledge, we give it to them, even through role plays and everything, even by talking to them as we go in the villages. So now people are aware what HIV/AIDS is, how it can be prevented, how it can be infected, and all that.
By supporting WOW's Working for Orphans and Widows mobile medical clinics, you can bring hope to countless communities. You can save a life.
Friends, there's something that I would recommend you do, and you don't have to do this, but if you have real interest, go online and Google Josephus, Wars of the Jews. Josephus, Wars of the Jews. Josephus is the great Jewish historian, and he writes about these events that surrounded the life of Jesus, both before and after, and he is gripping reading. Now, it's difficult reading in the sense that he writes in a kind of an awkward, ancient way. And yet it's worth kind of just grinding through it because it gives you background and insight into the time of the Gospels. And especially as we're dealing now with the siege of Jerusalem, and Jesus' prophetic insights vis-a-vis what was about to happen, it just adds kind of another dimension to your appreciation for what you're reading in the scriptures. Josephus, Wars of the Jews. Thanks for watching. See you next time.